Hello, I'm Kim Casey.
And I'm Cecile De Mello.
And we are Reclaiming Sisterhood. Welcome today to our episode entitled Crowned in Silence, the Black Women Executing Unrecognized. In today's episode, we're going to focus on unseen labor, overlooked leadership, and quiet genius of Black women who are doing the job, executing, sustaining, and delivering excellence, yet frequently finding themselves excluded from recognition, resources, and a seat at the table. Often we're praised for being reliable, indispensable, even heroic, but barely and rarely invited into the institutional power that our work creates. Our guest brings lived experience of being the behind the scenes strategist and the in the trenches forces, the one who holds everything together while the spotlight goes elsewhere. Together, we're going to ask what happens when you get it done, but you're not the one called in. The truth is, when Black women lead from the margins, systems survive. Yet, Black women themselves don't always thrive. This episode turns that dynamic inside out, reclaiming the narrative of expertise, initiative, and rightful belonging. Welcome, Cecile.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So there's this duality that we have. Pride in being competent versus the fatigue of being invisible. Right? We know the stuff. We out here. We working. We grinding. We putting strategies together. We making things happen. We changing lives in communities. But sometimes it falls on deaf ears. And we know that through the limited resources that organizations receive, through even just general acknowledgement of the great work that's being done. So what does it feel like to be the one who gets it done but doesn't get recognized?
It's actually a little interesting, and I would be lying if it's not an internal battle too, because there are some of the sisters that I do work with that will get recognized for work, right? But sometimes it's not the depth of the whole pie that is being presented as far as the work is, right? So I've been doing this work for over 20 years. And I've seen folks get recognized and then also torn down by everything from media to public perception. And I was taught earlier on in my organizing career that your work is always going to be the most important when others are learning leadership from you, right? And it's almost like tentacles of the work, right? And so I've been trying to pace myself throughout my career to make sure that it wasn't about who I was, but more about what I stood for, right? And that the more that I had young ladies or even young men being like, yep, I worked with Cecile and she taught me this and she taught me that, that's another young person or a person that I was able to work with that's extending the values of community organizing, community development. And so that's been, important. But to say that you don't get frustrated when it's like, what's going on? And why are you left at the table? And I think part of what has happened is, personally, I'm not a big social media person as far as like telling what's always going on. I want Teamwork Englewood's work to be Teamwork Englewood's work, right? But what happens is sometimes the work that you do, if people don't know that you did that, they will replicate mistakes. And so sometimes you have to balance being vocal about what you've done and what you've been through, but also making sure that you are not taking things and making the campaign or that initiative be about who you are as a person. Right. And that's something I've been struggling with. And as this new administration in the city of Chicago has even came forward, these are also people that I've organized with 20 years ago, but they're also people that I fussed at. And they're also people that I've called, not necessarily the main characters of the political administration, but some of their values is like, as a person that grew up poor in Chicago and a Black and brown voice, I'm feeling ignored in this space. And so I resonate with sometimes how voters feel because they don't feel included. And that for me is part of my work, is to make sure that I am fussing and making space for the people who are not being included. And I think what's happening a lot on both sides of the political sphere is that people are telling people what I'm doing is good for you. That's not how good work gets done. Mm-hmm. People have to co-create and be a part of solutions. Their wisdom has to be lifted up. We have to learn together, be on a journey. No matter how much you think you're Batman, no, that's not how this works. And so that's where I have to be the most vocal, is saying, where is the space for the people who are being directly impacted to lead?
And do you find that the space you're in, when you're asking for that information or you're pushing people in rooms to talk about that, are you getting the side eye, or are you getting people to say, yeah, we're ready for that?
I think I have to agitate the most around making space for that, because I think also in the political sphere right now, everyone's using kind of like data and talking points to say that they have the right answers. Mm-hmm. Because there is something about having the right answers in this moment that's supposed to make you winnable, you know? However, the issues around things from like public safety to food access, we don't have the answers. And part of why we don't have the answers is because people directly impacted are not a part of the decision making. And because we try to make things seem so simple as far as what the answers are, and they're very complicated. Public safety is very complicated. Food access is very complicated. And we're trying to say that I've got the answer, I've got the funding strategy that's going to fix everything. That is not how we get good work done, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we try to bring down our agendas into these really black and white talking points, it is the space where I have to interrupt the most.
Mm-hmm. So how do you keep going? How do you carry that weight? Because if you're the one in the room, because I'm typically the one in the room, mm-hmm. right? Bringing the voice to the voiceless, or, hey, asking the next question that people didn't think about. But when I'm that person, I get the side eyes and I get the sucking of the teeth, or I get, oh, here Kim is asking another question, mm-hmm. right? So how do you carry that weight along with you? Because that is a weight.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is I'm trying to be consistent. So I try to have the conversation. I'm also learning to, there's a time for me to be politically correct in what I'm saying, and there's a time not to be politically correct as well, mm-hmm. you know? So I'm trying to present both of those spaces as well. And I'm also trying to make sure I'm always bringing my data and my lived experience. So one of the things that's been kind of cool about being the executive director of Teamwork is, I was just having this conversation this morning with some of my leadership, is I'm going to have questions because the work we do also benefits my own personal existence, right? And mm-hmm, so mm-hmm. I'm asking questions because of what I see and what I'm experiencing. It's not just because I'm an ED. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm in spaces with funders or elected officials, you are not talking to someone who is operating at a grass tops level. You're talking to someone who's actually experiencing this. And that's what I'm trying to, make sure that it's not minimized, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was remiss in not giving your kind of a bio for you.
Oh, yeah, I just got up here talking.
We just jumped right in. But Cecile is the Executive Director of Teamwork Englewood. And in that role, she is a strategist and an organizational architect, because she, from what I know about Cecile, has taken Teamwork Englewood and placed it on the map. And maybe that is in part of this conversation, right, is that in your need and your want to center the organization, you as a leader sometimes take that back seat willingly because you want to put that organization out front. But Cecile has consistently stood in the gaps, delivering results, solving problems for the Englewood community. And she has not only been a leader in that community or in that organization, but she lives in the community. And I think this goes back to you talking about, like, what am I bringing to the table when I'm mm-hmm. talking to people? Is like, I'm not just bringing my role that I have at the organization, but I am a representative mm-hmm. of the community itself. comes with a unique lens. But when we know most nonprofit leaders don't live in the communities that they serve, right? So what is it that we can say to other women that might be running other organizations? How should they be centering their organization or their community that they're serving?
Yeah, I think, some of the other EDs in the community are always like, oh, Cecile, are you navigating all of this? And I said, well, I center what I want my legacy to be at the organization. Matter of factly, when there's days that the weeks are super stressful and my old man says, girl, we just go relax. And I'll say, when I get this stuff done. And I have in my head what I want done. And I always tell people, if you came to this organization, think about what you want to see that you built while you were there, because that's going to be your North Star. Because I think sometimes we're like, oh, I'm sick of this place, so I'm going to go get another job. And that's cool. And sometimes you have to move on, and that's understandable. But I think if you're trying to create something that's going to outlast you, that's where you sometimes have to be a little intentional, even pacing yourself to, or starting to say what you're not going to do and what you are going to do as you try to build, this legacy. But for Teamwork Englewood in particular, my legacy is, what would it look like for my kids to go to college and come back? And what have we built at Teamwork for them? So that's what's been kind of centering me on how I've been doing my work is, what would it look like for my babies to decide they want to buy their first home in this community? What would I need to be doing in this role as an executive director for that to happen? If my children need legal advice or if my children need employment, how am I building teamwork to do that? And part of that is not just the fundraising, it's also how I lead my team. So once my team members get to be maybe a manager, I teach them how to write grants. You want to sustain your work? You love what you're doing here? Help me do it. And that does two things. One, first of all, there's not enough Black people who know how to fundraise. And I'm being able to build this muscle for wherever they end up going, right? The second thing is part of how we grew so much is because I wasn't the only person, or our grant writer wasn't the only person thinking about how funds can strategically help us grow with our impact. Majority of my team, from my fellows in reentry to some of my ladies in health and wellness, they're all looking to see how I could create a legacy at the organization of what I came to this work was passionate about to do. And that's been important on making teamwork the powerful organization and not necessarily about one individual.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And I think about how many leaders don't do that. Right? Because it's more of do what I tell you to do. And then the worker is, okay, I did that. Now what? Right? And so what you're doing is you're teaching them to fish, right? More so than waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. So that's amazing. We're going to talk a little bit about this intersection of race and gender and credibility. How trust to do doesn't translate in trust to decide. So trusting to do something versus trusting to make a decision, especially when it talks about Black women, right? You got to trust yourself that what I'm doing is appropriate. But then how do we make that decision? How do we trust the decision that we made to do that thing?
Well, I think for me also, I'm in a space in leadership where I know I'm going to get things wrong. And if you're trying to do the work in a way where you're going to be impactful, stuff's going to not work the way you want it to. And I'm okay with pivoting. I'm okay with saying that didn't work. The other thing we do at Teamwork a lot is we'll go back to our clients and our participants and say, let's go back and look at your story a little bit more to figure out what's not working. This is where we've made some of our biggest strides in some of our workforce development and adult learning. It's being like, this isn't working. And so if I was just trying to be an ED, we wouldn't stop and say, we're making a mistake here. But that's not how I want to work. I want to be able to say, someone just approached me today, one of our Hallmark programs, I stopped this year. Because I didn't feel like we were getting the results. And my team members keep saying, well, what if we do it this way? And what if we do it? And I said, no, you have to go interview everybody who's an alumni. You have to do focus groups and surveys, and we bring that back to the table because I don't think what we're doing is working. And it was an 8-year-long program. I don't want to do anything that's not working because the system survives off of that.
That's right.
It survives off of us doing regular programming that's not being transformative enough, and I don't want to do that part. And the other way that I get this done is my funders, when they come to me and they try to give me these big goals and aspirations, oh, that is so cute. But if you're going to do the work with me, we have to be on a learning journey together. Because if you think you know what I'm supposed to be measuring in a community like Englewood, I can't trust you. Now, this isn't about you trusting me. I'm an expert in knowing that I'm not an expert. And if people are coming to the space saying, oh, I think this is the thing that we need to measure, I'm already fearful. You know what I'm saying? Because there's so many, not to the intersectionality about race and gender per se, but the intersectionality of disinvestment and racism that exists in a community like Englewood. And you tell me you got the one measurement tool? No, now I don't believe you.
So tell me a little bit about that, though, because that's got to be a pretty stark pushback on some philanthropists, right? Because when they come into the community and they say they want to fund you, we're supposed to be like, oh,
I say no all the time. I say no all the time. And see, my previous organization I worked at was a shoestring budget. You know what I'm saying? And at that organization, there was months I had to lay myself on and then get back on and lay myself off and all this stuff. And I really learned resilience. I also learned that the philanthropy community is fickle, and they will hop on trends and leave you in the dust with what works well. So I came into teamwork knowing that I was going to say yes and no. But if I did good work, they would come to me. And that's what's been happening the last few years. Of people's like, oh, I saw how you did this. I saw how you did this. And most of how we've been able to sometimes outperform is by saying, this isn't working the way that we think it is. Let's put on our, I like to call sometimes nonprofit work, that we're scientists, like we're social scientists. And we're saying, if this correlates with this, then that means this could happen. And that is how you create best practices. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to fund me for not trying to explore best practices, okay. But we're trying to figure out how to do the best that we can.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull a little bit on that trust, the word trust. So most of the time, Black women are recruited to solve the problem in organizations and in communities,
all over the place,
right? And we be like, yeah, girl, and we pulling up our sleeves ready to do this. However, organizations typically aren't structured for us to come in and solve the problem because the structure is that they just want to continue the way that they've always been operating, just put a little icing on top. So when Black women are trusted to execute, but they're not empowered to lead, what happens?
You know what? That's a good question. I think Black women are trusted to a certain extent on the things that are comfortable for power structures, right? So maybe, quote unquote, smaller pieces to the puzzle, the trends. They love it when we jump on trends with them. But there's been this issue in Englewood in particular that I've been very vocal and agitating about is the lack of capital investment. And when I bring up capital investment, I think some of the pushback then becomes, well, capacity. And so I can solve your problems and I can, make the road now straight that was crooked. But the real transformative things, you then say, I don't have the capacity to do. And what I've explored in this piece around this mix match on capital investment and real economic investment in Englewood is that we can't fail into that. But other systems can fail into that all the time. And I don't know if it's a combination of the impact of built environment or that capital funds limitations in the city of Chicago and cities like Chicago are really built on public financing and philanthropy in a way where if they trust that too much investment happens in this direction, it comes at the expense of others. Because I'm very clear that it has been public dollars that were taken from Englewood that went to build the other parts of the city in the last 30 to 40 years. You know, you close a train here and a train station here, but you open one somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know, you give subsidies for retail in areas that weren't populated at the expense of supporting economic activity, growth, and intervention in this community. So the cushion and the flexibility is given to another community, but not to us on the critical pieces, right? And so I think that is, and that's why I think, you know, people complain about how you can not ask for things, but there's a lot of symbolism in politics right now, right? And so the symbolism is because I can't give you the real transformative change. And so it's always okay when you're asking me for, I'll even put kind of programming a little bit in symbolic work, right? You can give me the funding for direct services, but when I ask for a huge radical investment for a corridor, you can't meet me halfway. But see, knowing all of my work, I know you did it before. So some of the tension sometimes I have with elected officials is, don't talk to me about what can't happen if it ain't no law that says that it can't, right?
Yeah.
Remember, everything we've built around systems, majority of the time, is practice, not law.
That's true. That's true. So that leads me to some systemic patterns, right? So systemic patterns keep Black women out of executive roles despite their readiness, right? So it's just not your time, or you just got here, or you're too overqualified for this, or you're not qualified enough, or, you know, and I'll go back to the one of the characteristics of white supremacy culture is fit. You just don't fit, right? And so with that, you know, there are barriers, and you named a few, but like our networks aren't the same, so we don't get the same opportunities. Lack of sponsorship, like you can't get the same sponsors that Planned Parenthood would get, or the, let's say, Lincoln Park Chamber of Commerce, even though you're doing probably spinning circles around them, right? And so we've got these things that say the system is created to say we're not ready. But what do you think we have to do to bump up against that system? Because you're doing that now.
Yeah. I'm trying to think through. It would just, for me, I think I've been consistent even when it was, you know, frustrating and it wasn't seen, you know. Our consistent community meetings, not moving away from the community plans, and then, you know, tracking our own internal data has been important for us, because I feel like a lot of how folks have came to us to then finally support us was because we had all of this to show as far as what we were doing to impact. You know what I'm saying? And what's unfortunate is everybody doesn't have the time or the finances to be consistent when nobody is seeing it. You know what I'm saying? I think as it relates to where Black women show up in the institutions that are supposed to have change, I think a lot of people benefit from the status quo, even in the independent sector. You know, and part of what we have to challenge is the kind of the bare minimum and how we move into trends. Most of my work was in Chicago Public Schools reform. And it always blows me at all the things that people come up to solve the education gap. And I always kind of joke at some research I pulled like 15 years ago and go, you know, it's small class sizes has always been tried and true, you know. And the fact that we come up with all this other stuff is just like, okay, that's interesting, but the class size is still hella big. and kids are still struggling in their classroom. So I feel the same way about, nonprofit work and sometimes how we're not transformational. And when people come into that space, especially when Black women are so connected to getting the good work done for their own survival, that they're bumping up against folks who are uncomfortable with the status quo and transformation.
I have to take a breath on that, girl. But that's so true. So how do we push up against that, though? Right? Because it's still our livelihood. We still want to see the community do better. We know that system exists. What are we doing? What are we doing? How do we continue to push? What do we have to do for ourselves in that?
Yeah, I think, bragging on about our own evaluations, how we've done our own research about the work that we're doing has been important for us at Teamwork Englewood as well. I also think being able to show up in spaces to interrupt a little bit is important as well. Most of my team, when they're going to, let's say, go to a community meeting, or I just had, one team member take some Englewood residents to Springfield, we're going to, and it's unfortunate we have to show up so on point, but we're going to show up on point. Mm-hmm. We're going to show up on point. We're going to make sure that we know what we're talking about, and we're going to be a little bit of agitators. Mm-hmm, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And that's been helping us a little bit to move the needle. Even in for, Teamwork Englewood has an amazing mix of both Black men and women that work at our organization in leadership roles all the way down. Mm-hmm. And even for my brothers at Teamwork Englewood, they're showing up to the space. We know what we're working on. We're confident. And I'll say this, almost all of my team members are co-creating their work.
Awesome.
They co-create their work plans. We work on creating tools together. It's like a laboratory in some sense. You know what I'm saying? And so when the team is engaged on trying to figure out how to measure their impact, it's a different type of organization to lead for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it also sounds like you are teaching them not just how to do programs in an organization, you're teaching them how to stitch together, be strategic while stitching together pieces of a system, right? So it's a little bit more than just a job that you're giving people. You're giving them a little bit of self-agency, self-advocacy, right? And in doing so, I think it's different than a lot of organizations. They just want people to come, punch the clock, do the thing that I told you to do, and do it well, right? So I can get my accolades. But in your case, because you're a leader of leaders, sometimes that puts you in the background because you have to lift up these other individuals.
Yeah, I hate talking to the press. If I could, I'd put them out every single time. No shade to reporters that are my friends, but I was thoroughly trained as an organizer before I really got into nonprofit work. And in community organizing, you're always told that if one person is the voice of an issue, you're weak. So the more people are being able to talk about the work and being able to speak truth to power, it actually shows how strong you are. So, my team complains, the funders say, oh, can you ask Cecile? And they be like, yeah, we ain't asking her. We know she's going to probably say no. And I do the things when I have to do the things, and I'm actually not too bad of a public speaker. But I would prefer my team to do it. Yes. And then they support their team to do it and take the lead. That makes us feel stronger, be stronger, and look stronger.
Okay, before we close out of here, I'm going to ask you one final question, and that is, what would true recognition and structural change look for to a woman like you?
If I was to move on from Teamwork Englewood, it would run even better. And that one day I could walk around with maybe my little grandkids and say, Mommy helped build that, that. You remember your sister and brother went to that with me, or this and this and this. That would be, super powerful. And then to have the leadership after me to be able to do the same thing would be dope.
There you have it, y'all. Cecile De Mello. leader of leaders. So being one who gets it done should never mean being the one left out. Black women have always led from the margins, not because we weren't ready, but because the systems are not ready, okay? And this episode is a reminder that visibility is not a reward. It's a right. Recognition is not an ego. It's equity. And leadership isn't given, it's reclaimed. So, if you like this episode and it's resonating with you, share it with someone whose leadership deserves to be recognized. Start a conversation in your workplace or the community. Follow, rate, and review the show to help more Black women hear what is meant for them. And above all, reclaim your voice, your vision, your right to be seen. The seat was always yours. Welcome home.